Well, gosh, thanks so much for the invitation to be with you today and to share some of my insights, some of which, well, many of which won't be new, but just an opportunity to reflect together on mental health and mental health issues and the role that the church can play in that. I have to say that you as Lutherans are light years ahead of lots of other faith communities when it comes to talking about and addressing mental health issues and the significant role that congregations can play in supporting people with challenges in that way. So thanks for the invitation to be here with you and to share. Thanks to Andy. Thank goodness you're back there. You know, I was saying to him earlier that when it comes to doing talks, I always get, of course, a level of anxiety, and I think that's a good thing because it keeps me on my toes. But the other piece that causes me some degree of anxiety and stress and causes me to swear from time to time is when the technology piece doesn't go well. So far it's going okay, and I know I've got a good guy at the back to help me with that, and it is a Lutheran sanctuary. Do you swear in Lutheran? No, you don't swear.
Only Presbyterian.
Only Presbyterian.
Is that right, Mike?
Yeah. Also, let me say condolences to the care committee relative to your most recent and very sudden loss. And when I heard about that, certainly keeping all of you in my thoughts and prayers. When we lose someone, it's always difficult, and when we lose someone in the context of a knowledge base and a community base and a friendship base and a co-worker base, those can be very difficult times, so my condolences to you. And I also just wanted to note, where is Mark? Who's Mark that we go to? Is Mark you? So Mark is the person I go, can I go to Mark, like if I've got complaints about city stuff, could you be my sounding board?
Yeah, I'll absorb all complaints. Do you do anything with them? No, that's why I said absorb.
You're a generous man if you can absorb all of this. That itself is a lot. That's a huge amount. So thank you for that. The other piece I'd like to say, just before I start, you know, in the city of Edmonton, we always try and start off with what we call a safety moment now. And for those of you who know what's gone on in the city of Edmonton over the course of the last year or two, we've had some very, very serious incidents and issues in the city which have resulted in fatalities. And so the city has a much higher profile now, or has done a lot more work, I should say, around the issue of safety and wellness. But the expansion of that safety piece is not only the physical safety piece around, you know, hard hats and steel-toed boots and reflective vests and all that goes with that. But the other piece that the city is emphasizing an awful lot more also is psychological safety, mental health, safety and well-being too. So we always start off with a safety moment in anything that we do these days in the city, and some of that is around the physical piece. If it's icy out there, hey, don't forget to be careful around that. But we also talk about psychological stuff too. So sometimes our safety moments are around mental health and psychological safety. So I wanted to start off with that piece today, because what I do know from teaching mental health first aid and lots of other courses around that over the last 5 or 6 or 7 years is that sometimes when we talk about mental health issues, it triggers things for people for a whole variety of reasons, right? So I just wanted to put that as that safety moment for us. If things trigger things for you today, which they may, for a whole variety of reasons, please be gentle with yourselves. And if you need support, gosh, what we're talking about these days around mental health is if you need support, don't let that go. Reach out for the support. So if there's a trigger for you today, be aware of that for yourself and do what you need to do for your own self-care and well-being. Alrighty, with that being said, here we go, Andy. Look at that, I just love that one. So, one of the things that I have done, and lots of other people, of course, have done and continue to do, is to recognize the fact that everybody has physical health, and we all know that, because we'll all talk about physical health. and sometimes the fact that our physical health is okay, and sometimes our physical health goes sideways, for whatever reason, right? So we walk we're walking down the sidewalk, and we slip on the ice, and we hurt our back, or we break a limb, or something like that happens. It impacts our physical health and our physical well-being. We all have physical health. Sometimes it's okay, sometimes it isn't. The other piece that we've been trying to talk about more and more is that we also, every one of us in this room, we also all have mental health. And sometimes our mental health is okay, just like our physical health is. And sometimes our mental health is not okay, for a whole variety of reasons. And those reasons can be related to things that go on for us in our lives. Those can be things around genetic predisposition. Those can be because we have experienced some form of trauma, and we know fundamentally that trauma impacts mental health. How could it not? It impacts our mental health, it impacts our physical health. And sometimes trauma will impact our mental health to a degree where we have mental health issues, and sometimes trauma will impact our mental health to the point where we end up with what's called a mental health disorder, a diagnosable mental health disorder. But what I'm trying to say in this first page, really, or in this first slide, is that we all have physical health and we all have mental health. And if we can think about it in that way, then it's never about us and them. It's never about us and them when we talk about physical health. Really, is it? It's always about us. And when it comes to mental health, it's the same. It's not about us and them. It's about us and us. Every one of us in this room, from time to time, for a whole variety of reasons, will have mental health challenges. The statistics will tell me that a certain percentage of people in this room have a mental health disorder. Or certainly you will know of people who have a mental health disorder of some kind. Not a weakness, not a failing. Simply a reality, a health issue that needs to be addressed and can be addressed. And the more we know about that, the more we can help ourselves address that, and the more we can help other people address that. So here's a definition for you, I hope. Here. So this is a definition around mental health. It's put out by the Public Health Agency of Canada. I won't read it, I'll let you read it yourselves. I'll just give you a second just to take a look at that, actually. So it's a wee bit wordy in the sense, because that government can be a bit wordy when it comes to things. But also it's a bit wordy because sometimes it's really hard to define clearly what mental health is, right? But one of the key things in this slide comes from the mental health first aid course that I teach. One of the things that's been intriguing relative to conversation around this particular slide and this definition is people have said, oh, I didn't realize that part. I never thought about that part. And some of the things that they drew out in terms of what they hadn't thought about or thinking about relative to mental health, spiritual well-being and interconnectedness. Spiritual well-being and interconnectedness. And knowing that, my goodness, do faith communities have a place to play, our piece, a significant piece, around supporting people's mental health? Spiritual well-being, interconnectedness. I'm going to we can just sit with that for a little bit of time, and we'll come back to it a little bit later. Oh, thank you. Thank you. So here are some facts. 1 in 3 Canadians will experience a mental health problem at some point in their lives. Those are the statistics. At least 1 in 5 Canadians will experience a mental health problem any given year. So what's the average size of a Lutheran congregation these days? Average size. Yeah.
We have about 200 in ours.
200 in yours, right? Is that about an average sort of,
yeah.
give or take? Okay. So what?
Lots of little ones.
Lots of little ones as well, right? Okay. Let's use 200 just as maybe a general guide, not necessarily specific. But if we plug the 1 in 3 Canadian piece into the 200 members in the congregation, What that says is that 1/3 of the 200 people in your church have had or will have some kind of mental health issue in their lifetime. What's 1/3 of 200? Is that 60? 60%. Yeah. 1/5 in any given year, so that's what, 20%. So you've got 40 people in any given year. So, and these are based on reported statistics. This is stuff where somebody has gone to their doctor, seen a psychiatrist, seen a psychologist, gone to the Medi-Center, gone to Emerge, and all of that statistical data has been gathered together. And so as a result of that, those are the figures, those are the pieces that we know. Now, I don't know what it's like for you in your lives, in your respective personal lives, or in your congregational lives, or in your work lives, depending on your various contexts there. But I know working for the city, those statistics are way, 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 way low. Because what they are is reported stuff. Reported stuff. And I would think in the city, I know in the city, that the statistics are much higher. But even if we go with the basic stats, we know that within your relative congregations, your faith communities, there is a significant cross-section of people who are suffering from some kind of mental health distress, mental health issue, or mental health disorder. In the city of Edmonton, currently, 25% of our employees who are away from work on short-term disability are away from work because of serious mental health issues. So from a very pragmatic point of view, the city looks at that and says, holy smokes, that is costing us a ginormous amount of money. It is second only to musculoskeletal stuff, where somebody has a fall or whatever. And we have a lot of people who do sort of hands-on work, so you expect that piece. And second only to heart disease. So musculoskeletal, heart disease, mental health. That's in the rating of things. And people who are off work in the city of Edmonton on long-term disability, so they passed the 3 months of short-term, they're on long-term, their illness is chronic, their likelihood of returning to work anytime soon is limited. 30% of those people, 30% are away from work because of serious mental health issues to the degree that it's compromised their ability to work. Chronic, disabling diseases that impact people in so many different ways and impact people, not only the individual, but of course the people who walk alongside them, who do their best to support them, etc., etc., etc. So those are the facts that we know. And I was chatting, where's the person from Dyna Life? There you are, sorry, I've forgotten your name. We were chatting just a bit before around, those questions and around the issue around the number of people who have mental health issues and how to support them. So here's some more stats for you. So that, again, these are based on the facts that we currently have, and these are based on how we see things trending. So depression will impact 8% of Canadians in their lifetime. Probably low. Likelihood of women experiencing depression is 2 times that of men. Anybody want to guess as to why that might be?
It's because we look after men. Seriously, I really believe that.
Home care, yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
Postpartum.
Postpartum is a piece of that, yes. And also, hold on to that piece about looking after men, would you?
Well, the nurturers, and so.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah.
It's the nurturing part, and
Yeah.
we just get depleted, and
Yeah.
we don't replenish it.
Sure.
And then we,
I just recently heard this on TV that men didn't suffer as much depression as women did. I just recently heard it.
So again, we're going basically on the stats, but there's lots of evidence, and we'll talk, when we get to anxiety, we'll talk about that piece and the impact, how many more women than men suffer from anxiety. And one of the things that we do know is that anxiety leads to depression quite often, right? But we'll get back to that piece. But that's part of it. Because women suffer more from anxiety than men do, then it can certainly lead to depression. Women tend to, gosh, it sounds very stereotypical, but women tend to care more about the well-being of others sometimes than men do. And so they take on more, and maybe more than they should, And I don't mean to sound stereotypical or in any way, but these are just sort of I'm just passing on research incidentally, just so don't shoot the messenger with this. And there's the postpartum for sure, and also hormonal as well can be contributing factors for sure. Right? Interesting statistics though, the percentage of people who are depressed who respond well to treatment, 80%. 80%. That's a good news story, right? It's a really, really good news story. But the percentage of people who don't reach out for treatment and support is 90.
Is that high?
Yeah. Is it getting better? Yeah, it is. Can churches do...
Do you think part of it is too that we don't have enough people to deal with mental health? Because
Absolutely.
I've run into a few situations with my family. And
Sure. You know, there's a big part of that. There's two things around that, for a whole bunch of things around that, for sure. One is, if you go to Emerge and get referred to a psychiatrist, holy smokes, it can take you ages. Even just to see a psychiatrist at Emerge can take a long time. If you get a referral to see a psychiatrist from your family doctor, wait 3 months. That's sort of the average, unless you're in crisis, right? Then the other piece around that is to see a psychologist sits now at around about $190 an hour. That is not covered at all by Alberta Health Services. If people have extended coverage like Blue Cross, or does Lutheran Community have an extended benefit coverage? So there'll be some coverage there. But again, I don't know what it's like for you, but in the city, our Blue Cross coverage is up to $1,000 a year for psychological care or psychological services. At $190 an hour, it doesn't take too long to eat up to $1,000.
no.
And especially if and that's per family. So interestingly enough, groups like Starbucks have increased that to $5,000 a year per employee for psychological support. I don't know what it's like in the churches, but whether...
For the ELCIC, it's 5,000. That was up last year.
Really?
From 1,000, yeah.
Good news story.
That's additional care.
Okay, that's great. That's really good to hear. Because accessibility is a big issue.
City of Calgary gives some to the people that work.
That's right, they do, yeah. And one of the things that we know now, and these are some of the things that maybe the care committee can explore more, is there are some free counselling centres, certainly in Edmonton. One's called Momentum. Free counselling service, drop in, one-time counselling. And you know, there's been some research that's been done around that, saying, well, does that help? And the research comes back and says, yes, it does. Because sometimes that's all that people need initially to help them get to the next step or help them manage what's going on for them. Name of the place? It's called Momentum. So I don't know if there's an equivalent in Red Deer or if there's an equivalent in Calgary, but so that's one of the things that we're learning around this is, yes, there are lots of people who have serious mental health disorders who need psychiatric care and who need a lot of significant psychological therapy. But there's lots of people who have stuff going on, wouldn't be considered to be a disorder, but they need some mental health support. And sometimes things like momentum counseling, an entry point for people where they can sit down with someone who has a skill set around that, can really, really be helpful. And the other thing that we know about all of this, and it's the same with early intervention when it comes to heart disease and cancer and diabetes and so forth, early intervention with mental health issues, the outcomes can be much, 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 much better. And I don't know what it's been like in your lives, for you who are clergy and others, but some of the saddest stuff that I've seen in my career, and certainly with the city, is people who have suffered in silence for many, 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 many years because they felt they couldn't reach out for help. And then they get to a point where their life is absolutely crippled and they have no choice now but to reach out for help. But if we had destigmatized and educated them and others around that, and they had reached out for help years and years before that, chances are their outcomes would have been much better for them. It's very sad to watch people struggling and feeling that they can't reach out for support and for help. Does the church have a place in that? Does the church have what I call sanctuary, a place where people can come and be themselves around that and really say who they are and what's going on for them? I hope so. And certainly the church has a role to play when it comes to those pieces around mental health as well. So what the trends also tell us, that by 2020, depression will become the second leading cause of disability next to heart disease. And that comes from the World Health Organization, who sort of watches trends. So just some information, some background information for you, basically. So I'm going to show you a video, I hope it'll play. I want to show you this video for two reasons. One, it's a young guy. His name is Kevin Briel, and he talks about his journey with depression. And the reason I wanted to show you, because, gosh, he does a good job of just telling the story. But the other piece is that millennials and younger are much more open, generally speaking, to talking about their mental health stuff than some of us, me, I'll just say me, I don't know anybody else who's my age in here, or maybe younger or older, than some of us who did not grow up with that, and who didn't talk about that, and maybe even still struggle with talking about that. You know, the analogy I use is, you know, in the Victorian era, people would talk about death, right? I'm Irish, so good grief. Where would you wake the person? You would wake the person in the front room, right? The casket would be open, and the sandwiches be there, and the Jameson's Irish whiskey would be there, and they'd be saying, and there's Jamie. Let's raise a toast to Jamie. Wasn't he a great old guy? And everybody'd be there. And we normalized death, because death is normal, and we brought it home, and we talked about it, and the kids were there, and it was natural. And what did we do in the 20th century? We sterilized it. And we put it into funeral homes. And we said, the kids can't go to the funeral home, you know, the kids can't see. We did those sorts of things around that. And we've moved even one step further now with that, in that we don't talk about mourning so much. We talk about celebrating life. Just a sec. We're mourning, first and foremost, we are mourning the loss of someone. That's what's going on. I don't know if you know a guy by the name of Alan Wolfelt, who's done a huge amount of work around grief and loss. And he fights against that sort of piece around celebrating life. That's an important piece, is to recognize the contribution of the person and who they were to us. But let's not let go of the mourning piece, because mourning is important. It's necessary. It's part of the grief journey that we're all on. Anyway, that's an aside. So, so we sterilize that. And then what did we do in the 20th, in the Victorian era? Did people talk about sex? Like, not a chance, right? Nobody would talk about sex. 20th century, we sterilized death and put it into funeral homes and all that kind of stuff. And then everybody starts to talk about sex instead. So we got But what I'm noticing with millennials, and I have a bunch of them in my family, is that they talk a lot about sex, that's for sure. But they talk about mental health in a very natural way. So I have a blended family of 7 children. The ages are 34 down to 26. I have one son-in-law who suffers from chronic post-traumatic stress disorder. I have a son who suffers from terrible anxiety. I've got a stepdaughter, who suffers from terrible anxiety. Another child who's sort of on the verge of depression, not a disorder necessarily, but certainly symptomatically. We talk about that. They talk about it. I don't initiate those conversations. They talk about it. And I think the millennials will to some degree be the people who will engage us more to talk about those kinds of things, to normalize it, and talk about mental health in the same way we easily talk about heart disease, or diabetes, or cancer, or a pain in your back, or whatever. The more we normalize, the more it becomes acceptable to talk about, and the more people will be willing to say, yeah, me too. I got that stuff going on as well. So this is Kevin Briel.
For a long time in my life, I felt like I've been living 2 different lives. There's the life that everyone sees, and then there's a life that only I see. And in the life that everyone sees, Who I am is a friend, a son, a brother, a stand-up comedian, and a teenager. That's the life everyone sees. If you were to ask my friends and family to describe me, that's what they would tell you. And that's a huge part of me. That is who I am. If you're asked me to describe myself, I'd probably say some of those same things. And I wouldn't be lying. I wouldn't totally be telling you the truth either. Because the truth is, that's just the life everyone else sees. In the life that only I see, who I am, who I really am, is someone who struggles intensely with depression. I have for the last 6 years of my life, and I continue to every day. Now, for someone who has never experienced depression or doesn't really know what that means, that might surprise them to hear, because there's a pretty popular misconception that depression is just being sad when something in your life goes wrong. When you break up with your girlfriend, when you lose a loved one, when you don't get the job you wanted. But that's sadness, that's a natural thing, that's a natural human emotion. Real depression isn't being sad when something in your life goes wrong. Real depression is being sad when everything in your life is going right. That's real depression, and that's what I suffer from. And to be totally honest, that's hard for me to stand up here and say. It's hard for me to talk about. And it seems to be hard for everyone to talk about it, so much so that no one's talking about it. And no one's talking about depression, but we need to be, because right now it's a massive problem. It's a massive problem. But we don't see it on social media, right? We don't see it on Facebook, we don't see it on Twitter, we don't see it on the news, because it's not happy, it's not fun, it's not right. And so because we don't see it, we don't see the severity of it. But the severity of it, the seriousness of it is this. Every 30 seconds, somewhere, someone in the world takes their own life because of depression. And it might be 2 blocks away, it might be 2 countries away, it might be 2 continents away, but it's happening every single day. And we have a tendency as a society to look at that and go, so what? So what? We look at that and we go, that's your problem, that's their problem. We say we're sad and we say we're sorry, but we also say, so what? Well, 2 years ago was my problem. Because I sat on the edge of my bed, where I'd sat a million times before, and I was suicidal. I was suicidal. And if you were to look at my life on the surface, you wouldn't see a kid who was suicidal. You would see a kid who was the captain of his basketball team, the drama and theater student of the year, the English student of the year, someone who was consistently on the honor roll and consistently at every party. So you would say I wasn't depressed, you would say I wasn't suicidal, but you'd be wrong. You'd be wrong. So I sat there that night beside a bottle of pills with a pen and paper in my hand, and I thought about taking my own life, and I came this close to doing it. I came this close to doing it. And I didn't. So that makes me one of the lucky ones, one of the people who gets to step out on the ledge and look down but not jump. One of the lucky ones who survives. Well, I survived, and that just leaves me with my story, and my story is this. In 4 simple words, I suffer from depression. I suffer from depression. And for a long time, I think I was living 2 totally different lives, where one person was always afraid of the other. I was afraid that people would see me for who I really was, that I wasn't the perfect popular kid in high school everyone thought I was, that beneath my smile there was struggle, and beneath my light there was dark, and beneath my big personality just hid even bigger pain. See, some people might fear girls not liking them back, some people might fear sharks, some people might fear death, but for me, for a large part of my life, I feared myself. I feared my truth, I feared my honesty, I feared my vulnerability, and that fear made me feel like I was forced into a corner. I was forced into a corner and there was only one way out. And so I thought about that way every single day. I thought about it every single day, and if I'm being totally honest standing here, I've thought about it again since, because that's the sickness. That's the struggle, that's depression, and depression isn't chicken pox. You don't beat it once and it's gone forever. It's something you live with. It's something you live in. It's the roommate you can't kick out, it's the voice you can't ignore, it's the feelings you can't seem to escape, and the scariest part is that after a while, you become numb to it. it becomes normal for you. And what you really fear the most isn't the suffering inside of you, it's the stigma inside of others, it's the shame, it's the embarrassment, it's the disapproving look on a friend's face, it's the whispers in the hallway that you're weak, it's the comments that you're crazy. That's what keeps you from getting help. That's what makes you hold it in and hide it. It's the stigma, so you hold it in and you hide it, and you hold it in and you hide it. And even though it's keeping you in bed every day and it's making your life feel empty no matter how much you try and fill it, you hide it because the stigma in our society around depression is very real. It's very real. And if you think that it isn't, ask yourself this. Would you rather make your next Facebook status say you're having a tough time getting out of bed because you hurt your back? Or you're having a tough time getting out of bed every morning because you're depressed? That's the stigma. Because unfortunately, we live in a world where if you break your arm, everyone runs over to sign your cast. But if you tell people you're depressed, everyone runs the other way. That's the stigma. We are so accepting of any body part breaking down other than our brains. And that's ignorance. That's pure ignorance. And that ignorance has created a world that doesn't understand depression, that doesn't understand mental health. And that's ironic to me because depression is one of the best documented problems we have in the world, yet it's one of the least discussed. We just push it aside and put it in a corner and pretend it's not there and hope it'll fix itself. Well, it won't. It hasn't, and it's not going to, because that's wishful thinking. And wishful thinking isn't a game plan, it's procrastination, and we can't procrastinate on something this important. The first step in solving any problem is recognizing there is one, but we haven't done that. So we can't really expect to find an answer when we're still afraid of the question, and I don't know what the solution is. I wish I did, but I don't. But I think it has to start here. It has to start with me. It has to start with you. It has to start with the people who are suffering, the ones who are hidden in the shadows. We need to speak up and shatter the silence. We need to be the ones who are brave for what we believe in, because if there's one thing that I've come to realize, if there's one thing that I see as the biggest problem, it's not in building a world where we eliminate the ignorance of others. It's in building a world where we teach the acceptance of ourselves. We're okay with who we are, because when we get honest, we see that we all struggle and we all suffer, whether it's with this, whether it's with something else. We all know what it is to hurt. We all know what it is to have pain in our heart. We all know how important it is to heal. But right now, depression is society's deep cut that we're content to put a Band-Aid over and pretend it's not there. Well, it is there. It is there, and you know what? It's okay. Depression is okay. If you're going through it, know that you're okay. And know that you're sick. You're not weak. And it's an issue, not an identity, because when you get past the fear and the ridicule and the judgment and the stigma of others, you can see depression for what it really is. And that's just a part of life. Just a part of life. And as much as I hate some of the places, some of the parts of my life depression has dragged me down to, in a lot of ways, I'm grateful for it. Because yeah, it's put me in the valleys, but only to show me there's peaks. And yeah, it's dragged me through the dark, but only to remind me there is light. My pain, more than anything in 19 years on this planet, has given me perspective. And my hurt's forced me to have hope. Have hope and to have faith. Faith in myself. Faith in others. Faith that it can get better, that we can change this, that we can speak up and speak out and fight back against ignorance. Fight back against intolerance. And more than anything, learn to love ourselves. Learn to accept ourselves for who we are, the people we are, not the people the world wants us to be. Because the world I believe in is one where embracing your light doesn't mean ignoring your dark. The world I believe in is one where we're measured by our ability to overcome adversities, not avoid them. The world I believe in is one where I can look someone in the eye and say, I'm going through hell. And they can look back at me and go, me too, and that's okay. And it's okay, because depression is okay. We're people. We're people, and we struggle, and we suffer, and we bleed, and we cry. And if you think that true strength means never showing any weakness, then I'm here to tell you, you're wrong. You're wrong, because it's the opposite. We're people, and we have problems. We're not perfect, and that's okay. So we need to stop the ignorance, stop the intolerance, stop the stigma, and stop the silence. We need to take away the taboos. Take a look at the truth and start talking. Because the only way we're going to beat a problem that people are battling alone is by standing strong together. By standing strong together. And I believe that we can. I believe that we can. Thank you guys so much. This is a great
So I wanted to show you that, because it was pretty powerful. It was 2013. Unfortunately, I'm not so sure that we've come a long way since then. I think we've come a bit of a way, but not a long way. I think, as I've watched it now a few times, I think if I was still in a congregation, that would be a sermon. And then I would do what I'm hoping I'm going to do with all of you, and that is talk about the role that the church has to support somebody like Kevin. Because there's a Kevin in every one of our respective congregations. In fact, there's a whole bunch of Kevins in our respective congregations. And you know, he talks about authenticity, right? Talks about being and having safe places to be genuine and who we are. Can churches provide that sanctuary for that? Yeah, absolutely, they can provide that sanctuary for that. So I'll come back to that in a wee bit. Real, B-R-E-E-L. And I'm sure there are others besides. I just found what he said was very powerful, and that it came from, he was 20, he's 23, 4, 5 now, I guess, somewhere around there. So, just a little bit more education piece. Anxiety disorders. Anybody in this room know somebody who suffers from an anxiety disorder? Right on. Yeah. Look. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. So, you know what we know again from the reported facts is that 16% of women and 9% of men suffer from anxiety disorders. Why do women suffer more from anxiety disorders than men do? What the research tells us is, which we were just talking about a little while ago, is that women tend to generally care more for the well-being of other people than men do. And maybe they care too much sometimes. And when we try to do everything and care in so many different ways, and none of us are capable of actually doing all of that, what can that do to our well-being? It can create a level of anxiety for us. So that's one piece, yes?
Is it not possible that we just report more?
That's the other part. So women report more. From the research, yeah, we know that for sure, that women report more. The research does tell us that other piece as well, and the research also talks about the hormonal piece too, contributing factors. But yeah, absolutely, women report more. Are men starting to report more? Yes, they are. Partly because part of that de-stigma, that you know, it is not a weakness to have an anxiety disorder. It isn't, whether you're male, female, or it doesn't matter. Lots and lots of people suffer from anxiety disorders. Just the hands that go up in this room, that would tell me that the statistics that we have here are way, 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 way too low. I would hazard a guess that we're at 25 to 30% of people who don't necessarily have the disorder, full-blown disorder, but who have anxiety to the degree that it impacts their ability to live their lives the way they want to. And anxiety is, you know, with the hands that have gone up in the room, you know, either directly or indirectly, how absolutely crippling anxiety can be. And for people who suffer from a generalized anxiety disorder, the analogy we sometimes use is that they're driving their car at 70 miles an hour all the time, because they're always on edge. They're always waiting for a shoe to drop. They're always waiting for the next bad thing to happen. They look at the world often quite negatively. Their anxiety is the piece that speaks often. It's a lovely day, but it's going to snow later. That's a simple analogy, but that's one that's out there. And when you live at that level of anxiety, it is absolutely exhausting. And what does it do untreated? It can lead to fatigue. It can lead to depression. Some of the things that we know for sure from research is that high stress High stress that's unmanaged or overwhelming can lead to a level of anxiety, can lead to depression. Not in every situation, but certainly there is a possibility there. So underneath all of this, one of the things that we as a church, as church communities can do, is to talk more about stress and how to manage stress in ways that are healthy for us instead of it managing us. There's a book, Gabor Mate is a physician out of Vancouver. He's written a book called When the Body Says No, The Hidden Cost of Stress. He goes so far as to say in his theory that there's lots of things that lie dormant in our systems. And if we don't manage our stress well, there is the possibility that that stress can trigger that dormant gene to activate. And whether that's cancer, diabetes, ALS, anxiety, depression, the list goes on. Body Says No, The Hidden Cost of Stress. He also goes on to say that our bodies are very, very good at telling us things and saying things to us, but we are not good listeners. And sometimes we don't listen until the body finally says, I'm not doing this anymore. You're not doing this anymore. And we end up with a heart attack. We end up with a diagnosis of whatever. We end up becoming so chronically depressed that we can't function. So what we do know, and churches can play a significant role around this, is that self-care piece. Are you looking after yourself? Spiritually, physically, emotionally, and mentally. And if you're not, this is a place of sanctuary where you can talk about that. Where it's okay to talk about that. Where it's okay to express how you're feeling. And it's okay to say, this is what I need. Can you help me find what I need? Other anxiety disorders, panic disorder. Know anybody who suffers from panic attacks? Again, it can be overwhelming. And people who suffer from panic disorder also often suffer from what's called agoraphobia. And agoraphobia used to be believed to be, the fear of going outside. It's not that. Agoraphobia is the fear of having a panic attack in a context where you are not supported and where you may feel embarrassed. So, that's the part where it can control then. Those panic disorders can actually control people's ability to go anywhere or do anything. Phobias, anybody got a phobia? Everybody's got phobias of some kind or other, right? And the key with phobias is how much does the phobia control us and how much do we control the phobia? And underneath all of these anxiety disorders, one of the pieces of hope that we can convey to the people in our congregations as a part of that sanctuary piece is, you know what? These are very treatable. You don't have to continue to feel this way. You don't have to live like your body is going at 70 miles an hour all the time. Anxiety disorders are one of the most treatable disorders. And there's lots of really good treatment out there. And it's not simply about going to medication, because everybody says, I go see my doctor will put me on some medication or whatever. No. It's not simply about that. It can be, but usually it's about all kinds of other modalities too that will help the person feel better. The analogy, I've forgotten your name. We were chatting, or the Dino Life lady.
Gerda.
Sorry?
Gerda?
Sorry. I should refer to you as a Dino Life lady, should I? I just remember that's where you worked, Karen. We were talking, just before, as we were, before this, just about analogies. And, people being sometimes afraid of going to reach out for treatment and for support, because sometimes it feels like it's going to be only medication. And that's the sole piece that's going to make a difference. And sometimes medication does. And sometimes it is a part of that. But the analogy we were chatting about was diabetes. So if you're a brittle diabetic, yeah, you've got to be on insulin. That's a fact, right? To manage that. But if you're a type 2 diabetic, that can be managed through exercise, through good dietary habits, etc., etc., etc. Wouldn't necessarily require medication. So when it comes to things like depression to some degree and anxiety, yeah, maybe medication to help with some aspects of that. But there's really good what's called cognitive therapy practices and other practices that can help people who are suffering from anxiety. That's the piece we can also tell people in our congregations. You have an anxiety disorder? Get help. Well, it means I'm going to go on meds. Not necessarily. Go to your doctor, explore all the options. It's about you getting well. It's about you doing what you need to do for yourself, and we'll help you with that. Trauma-related disorders, so things like acute stress disorder. So an acute stress disorder is, let's say you leave here today, and you're driving down the street, and you see a child get hit by a car. What is that going to do to your stress and to your mental health? It's going to send your stress right through the roof. That's normal. That acute stress will stay with us for a bit of time, and it will generally unwind itself with help and with support. If it doesn't, there is a possibility that for some people, it will lead to what's called post-traumatic stress disorder. Not always, but certainly in some cases. Post-traumatic stress disorder can be terribly disabling for people. When people do some studies around the disabling nature of illness, they talk about paraplegia and post-traumatic stress disorder as being equal in terms of their disabling nature. Substance use disorders. It used to be that we had, in Alberta, ADAC, right? Addiction Services. We no longer have that. We have mental health services through AHS, which includes addictions. Why is that? Because the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, a number of years ago now, classified addictions, substance use disorders, as mental health issues. Because they are mental health issues. And so we're sort of looking at them differently. It's an illness, it's a disorder that needs to be treated with as much compassion and love and understanding and forgiveness and generosity and support and empathy as we do any other kind of illness. So there's big steps that we're sort of taking around that and more that we need to. Gabor Mate, who I referred to earlier, he does a lot of work on trauma, and he would go so far as to say that underneath every addiction is trauma. Because sometimes we use the medication to manage the horrible pain inside our minds, inside our bodies. We dull the pain by medicating ourselves. I do a lot of work with fire rescue, a lot of work with first responders. And in the studies that have been done in the past, we've recognized that. First responders who are exposed to things that most people want to run away from, and they're engaged in that, it impacts them. How could it not impact them? And for some, they've managed that by self-medicating. Sometimes they go for a few beers after the event to sort of calm the nerves, takes the anxiety down a bit, elevates the mood a little bit, right? But what we know about things like alcohol is actually a depressant. And so it will help for a while, but when it starts to wear off, people are more depressed and they're more anxious. So what will they do sometimes? They'll medicate themselves more. And then it becomes this vicious circle. And then we sometimes end up with what's called comorbidity, and that is where somebody has an anxiety disorder, and they also have a substance use disorder, because they've used that substance to try and manage their anxiety. If we can get underneath some of those things, and recognize the fact that in many cases, people who suffer from alcoholism, what's underneath that has contributed to the way they are? Yeah, there's a genetic component in some cases, but as far as Mate is concerned, he would say, underneath those addictions, there's a huge amount of trauma and a huge amount of pain that people have not been able to address or manage, except to try and dull it as best they can. I'll quickly go through some others. Bipolar disorder, 1% of the population. Anybody in the room know somebody who suffers from bipolar disorder? Yeah. Seasonal affective disorder. So we've got, what, like 168 days of minus, like seriously. Lack of sunshine and cold. But actually seasonal affective disorder is essentially the lack of vitamin D. And some people suffer significantly from the disorder. My sense is that most of us in this climate, it impacts us to some degree or other. I don't think I suffer from the disorder, but I can tell you I know that when end of February, beginning of March starts to come around, and theoretically the sun is up longer and it's a bit warmer, it changes my mood. It elevates my mood. It elevates my energy levels. And I don't notice that in January. I just feel more tired, just whatever. But I realize that's probably what it is for me. For some people, that can be quite chronic and quite disabling for them. Schizophrenia, 1% of the population. Eating disorders, prevalent more in women than in men. I don't think I need to explain to you why that is the case. And certainly eating disorders for more young people than others, for sure. So with all of that stuff, and this is like the condensed version of a mental health first aid course, just to give you some bits and pieces of some of the realities of mental health and mental health issues and the prevalence of them. The question is, what can faith communities do to help those in need? And I believe that church communities, we've always talked about church communities being a place of sanctuary, a place where people can come and worship, a place of sanctuary where refugees or displaced people can come and they can be safe, a place of hospitality and a place of understanding. So if the church has always been that, can the church be a place of sanctuary for those of us, and I say us because it's all of us at some level, for those of us who from time to time either suffer from some mental health issues, or for those who end up with a significant mental health disorder that disables them and makes it really hard for them to manage? Can the church be a place of sanctuary for people to come and say, I am John, and I suffer from depression, and I need some help to manage that? Can we be open about that in the same way as we might say, I am John, and I have a cancer diagnosis, and I need your help, and I need your prayers, and I need your support to help me manage that? I think the churches can do that. I think you as Lutherans are doing that, which is just remarkable. It's wonderful. But knowing that, then churches need to understand more, right? They need to educate themselves and others more. And they need to make sure that they build a place, when it comes to the mental health place side of things, where people can openly say, this is where I'm at, and this is what I've got going on. And they'll be received with understanding, and they'll be received with love, and they'll be received with grace, and they'll be received with empathy. Are we doing okay time-wise, Carl? Okay.
Yep.
I wasn't sure if you were giving me the evil eye or just looking at me.
I'm just dealing with the back problem.
Oh, okay, I got you. I understand. That's okay. I'm glad we're good friends. I say I'm glad we're good friends. I can banter with you that way. So, anybody in this room familiar with a woman by the name of Brene Brown? Right on. Yeah. There's a difference between sympathy and empathy. So I'm just going to show you this. It's a video that she's done. It's a great way of sort of explaining that piece. Certainly when it comes to being supportive to people with mental health issues, empathy is critical. It comes from that place of non-judgment. It comes from that place of understanding. It comes from that place of feeling with people. Here she is. What makes something better is connection. And my goodness, do the churches have a role to play in that connectedness? Anybody seen that before? Yeah. I sort of get something new out of it every time I watch it. So it's about feeling with people. It's about being with people. And one of the things, of course, that we know when it comes to mental health issues, especially serious mental health disorders, is it's a journey. And it can be quite a journey, and it can be quite a painful journey for the person who's suffering from the disorder, and it can be quite a painful journey for those who are also walking alongside them. But it's a tremendous gift to give to other people, is to say, you know what, I'm here with you, and I'm here to help as best I can. Our human nature is to what Brene Brown calls, silver lining it. We try to make it better. And that's human instinct, right? This is who we are as people, and that's fine. But there are times when we can't make it better by doing that piece. But what we can do to make it better is that we can connect with people. We can connect with people. There's a course called Psychological First Aid. I think I would encourage you Bishop to look into that one maybe somewhere down the road. Did I talk to Mark about that? Or do you? Yeah, Mark, okay. Talk to Mark about that. So you take complaints and recommendations? You just do what the bishop says, don't you? Pretty well.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. Aren't you guys always supposed to do what the bishop tells you to do? Isn't that how it goes? No. Not in this Lutheran Synod. I completely lost my place. Where was I there a second ago? Oh yes, about another course, yes. So there's lots of great mental health courses and many more that continue to be developed. But what is called psychological first aid. And psychological first aid is primarily about being with people after they've been involved in a serious traumatic event. And what is psychological first aid in its very simplest form? It's about being with people. It's about saying to Diane, holy smokes, that must have been very difficult for you to watch that. I'm here to help you in the best way I can, Diane. Can I get you a glass of water? Can I sit with you and just be with you? Can I help you by making sure you're warm? Can I get you home to where you need to be today? Is there someone that I can call that you want to come and be with you, maybe alongside me or someone else? Are there other things that I can do to help? And just being with people. That's psychological first aid. It's very simple, isn't it, in many ways, but it's very profound. First responders, when they were asked, what do you need after you've dealt with a very, very serious incident? And serious incident for first responders are things like Humboldt and the injury or death of children, or the injury or death of one of their own. Terribly traumatic for them, sits with them forever, right? If you ask first responders, can you remember certain incidents in your career? Guaranteed, if they've had incidents with children that have traumatized them, they'll come back and they'll say yes. And they'll either want to talk about it sometimes or they won't want to talk about it, understandably. But when they've done some research around saying to first responders, what do you need after you've been involved in a traumatic situation, a difficult, really stressful situation? Two things come to the surface for them. One is that somebody senior to them recognizes that it's been a traumatic incident. So in fire rescue in Edmonton, it would be the platoon chief or a district chief who would say to the captain in the hall, that was a pretty crappy one, wasn't it? How are you guys doing? First thing. Second thing, take them out of service. And what that means is they're out of service for a bit of time so that they can breathe and just be with each other. It's very simple, isn't it? You know, it's not rocket science. But what we do know from what first responders tell us is that can make the world of difference. Can we in our faith communities do similar things when people are in crisis at a mental health level or any other level? Yes, we can. When people are in crisis, can we support them by simply, in quotes, being there for them and with them? Yes, we can. Can we provide them a place of grace and understanding? Yes, we can. Can we create a place of non-judgment? Yes, we can. Can we empathize with them in really healthy and constructive ways? Yes, we can. And yes, we can make that happen. Here's a quote. Interestingly, this quote, I can't remember, the guy's name is Druin. He's out of Ontario. And actually, he doesn't do work with churches. He does work with corporations and leadership in corporations. I'll just let you read it. You've heard my voice enough. Interesting, being used in the context of leadership in corporations, in the corporate world. Is it something that we could literally translate and use within the context of our own faith communities? Absolutely. What we know, and you all know as well, if not better than I do, that being present to people, listening to them, really actively listening, and active listening, as we all know, means hearing what they're saying, not getting ready to give an answer to what we think they may want or need, not making assumptions about anything, being focused on them and who they are, that active listening piece, that active engagement piece can make such a difference. And they in turn then can make a difference to other people. So here, of course, is a good old Henry Nouwen, one of my mentors over the years. The friend who can be silent with us in a moment of despair or confusion, who can stay with us in an hour of grief or bereavement, who can tolerate not knowing, not healing, not curing. That is the friend who cares. That is the church member who cares. That is the priest who cares. That is the deacon who cares. That is the mental health support person who cares. We're not about curing, we're not about healing, but interestingly enough, what we do know is that with people with mental health issues, certainly significant, serious mental health issues, we're not in the business of curing. That's somebody else who does that, and maybe it can't be cured but managed. But what we can do is we can provide a place of healing. We can provide a place of healing for people. And how do we do that? By all of these things. Where people feel accepted. Oh, I have to get it up there, don't I? Where they feel safe. Safe to say, this is who I am, and this is what's going on for me. Safe because whoever they're talking to in the faith community will say, yeah, I know about that. I'm doing my best to learn more about that. And what can I do to help you? Or here are some of the resources that I can provide to help you. Community instead of loneliness and isolation. One of the many studies that have been done around mental health over the last while talks about the impact of loneliness and isolation on people's mental health. And the equivalency is this, that the impact of loneliness and isolation on people's mental health is the same as the impact of smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day is on their physical health. Can congregations and faith communities help with the isolation and loneliness piece? Yes, they can. If people feel that they are welcomed for who they are and with all that they bring with them. Certainly, and you probably heard many stories around this too, is that people don't necessarily feel that they can share that. Or if somebody suffers from schizophrenia, or if somebody suffers from bipolar disorder, or if somebody suffers from anxiety disorders, they will maybe naturally isolate themselves because they don't know how they're going to be when they go out. And sometimes families will isolate themselves too because they don't know how that family member is going to be when they're out in the community. But if we as congregations can create that environment where we say, you know what, here, you're welcome for who you are. We're doing our best to understand this, to empathize with you. Let us know what you need. Then we create more of a sense of community for them. It moves away from the isolation piece and moves away from the loneliness piece and contributes to care and support and contributes to their overall well-being. And then the other piece is that openness to remove the masks. Anybody in this room wear a mask? Don't we all, right? Yeah. Wouldn't it be wonderful if faith communities could be places where we literally didn't have to wear masks at all, where we would be received for who we are, warts and all, skeletons in the closet and all, issues and all, because we all have them. But sometimes, I don't know what it's like in the Lutherans, but I know in the Presbyterian Church, it can be a place of judgment, antagonism, it can be a place where people feel isolated, where they can feel marginalized. I don't know if it happens in the Lutheran Church or not, but it certainly has happened in my denomination. I've seen it, to some degree experienced it. And how unfortunate is that? Because realistically, we should be the place to where people will go and where they will be received as they are. I was saying to somebody a while ago, a couple of years ago actually now, I was driving down a road and I passed a church and I passed a fire hall. And as I was driving down the road, I said to myself, if I was in crisis right now, at a mental health level or at a physical health level, where would I go first? And you know where I defaulted to right off the top? The fire hall. Which is interesting in my thought process. I had to sort of analyze that for myself. So why did I think that way? Why did I feel that way? And partly because I spent a lot of time with firefighters. A lot of time with firefighters. They are wonderful people. They are great big teddy bears, most of those guys. And they have my back. And I know that. And we've done a lot of work around mental health and mental health stuff. And there's much, much more openness in fire rescue now to say, I got stuff, I need some help with that. Okay, we'll get you the help that you need. And so I was thinking about that and thought, holy smokes, is that just me? Or does the church need to do more around being like a fire hall where where there's a beacon there and you can go there anytime in regard to anything and experience sanctuary, love, understanding, and care. So it was a good thing for me to sort of think through in my own mind. And one of the things I've talked, some people when they come to see me at the city, they want to talk about religious stuff, right? Others don't, which is just fine. But sometimes we'll talk about authenticity. What's it mean to live lives that are authentic, real, true? And some of the things that we talk about is how important it is for all of us to live lives of integrity and of authenticity. And how do we do that? And what does that actually mean? And some of the stuff that I've chatted with people back and forth with is this statement, right out of Hamlet. The gift that we can give ourselves is the gift of being true to ourselves. And the gift that sanctuary churches can give to all of us is a place where we can be true to ourselves. Because we're not always true to ourselves, either because of stigma, either because of stuff that we have in the closet, because of our failings and our shortcomings and all that goes with that. And sometimes those failings and those shortcomings, we can beat ourselves up royally with that stuff, over and over and over and over and over, which can create a level of anxiety, which can create a level of depression, which can contribute to mental health issues. Does the church have a role in saying, we receive you for who you are, not for who we think you should be? For who you are as a human being, with all your failings and all your shortcomings, and we love you as you are, okay? And we seek to do the very best to help you through that. Will that contribute to people's mental health? 110% it will. We know that philosophically, we know that ideologically, and we know that practically from our research as well. What have I got? 2, 5? 1? 3? 1. Slave driver. Okay.
Have time later.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, I've only got 2 more slides. That's good. That's perfect. Sorry about that. So, I'll just sort of wrap it up with these things. Like grace, receiving others as we are. The sanctuary, where we can be true to ourselves. One of the things about Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Sodom and Gomorrah, theoretically, the talk was, well, they were just cities where everybody did really bad things. They were immoral. But the other sort of reflection on Sodom and Gomorrah is it was a place where people were not hospitable to other people. Church and community, the sanctuary is about hospitality, healing, not curing, healing, where we empathize and seek to understand. And I'm going to end with this piece because I just wanted to bring that in. I believe this piece. That's just my own sort of theology around that. When Jesus talked about abundant life, I think the abundant life of which he spoke and of which he speaks is about being true to ourselves, being honest with ourselves. There's the grace, is it not? There's the abundant life. There's the love. There's the understanding. There's the forgiveness, allowing us to be who we are with all of our imperfections. And that is abundance. And that is truly a gift that we can give to ourselves and a gift that we can give to others. And sanctuary in the 21st century around mental health and emotional well-being can contribute to that.